I open it with the console so we can see it checks your Python version. And then we have here this Plex icon. Here you can see Plex, right click. We right click and then we have a few options. We can open different software. We open them and they will have menus and elements like that. And we have obviously things like help and report. And we have this one of the most important tools, how to load anything. So let's click on that one. And then we get the loader that I just showed, and we can open different elements, work, publish. Let's, for example, open this one. And then you can see it does a certain things. It opens Maya. It gives Maya certain information. It creates a menu. It adds certain paths. You can see we have even our custom splash screen and so on.
Hi, and welcome to the TD Meetup. My name is Alexander Richter. I'm a technical director for visual effects, animation, and games. And I worked at companies like WeatherFX and Framestore on Avatar, The Way of Water, and Monsters at Work.
The Open Source Pipeline Plex is a visual effects, animation, and games pipeline. Basically, like every pipeline, the goal is to streamline the process of a production. So if you think about a production, it's a bunch of departments, a bunch of artists, a bunch of tasks, things to do, and they all go from the beginning till the end, till the film, till the game, till the series is ending. But they all have to communicate with each other. They all have to create. They all have to, structure things and save things and export things and so on. So that is what the Pipeline Plex does. It basically helps you to navigate the project from beginning till end, from one department to the other. That is the idea of every pipeline. The point of a pipeline is to connect different departments, different tasks together, so everyone can only focus on the art, on the creation, and the pipeline does the heavy lifting of saving, exporting, naming conventions, and all the things that are necessities, but not particularly interesting or important for the creation itself, basically. Plex is one of these pipelines where it connects this, it attacks and connects different DCCs, different operation systems, and it allows you to, wherever you work, in whichever department, in whichever software you work, it allows you to tackle things and connect them and use it basically in every environment while having a minimum amount of code and elements to kind of distract you from all the elements that it is. Before we dive into that, let me first show you how everything started. And I show you by showing a short film. And this is the film that started Plex. Let me show you Breaking Point. As you saw, a lot of explosions and stuff like that. It was a student film, and the idea was literally to mimic Marvel, to create a short film to present also for future applications and stuff like that, to get also a job in that kind of environment. And the idea was to create a short film that has the quality and the kind of appeal of a typical Marvel movie with all these like effects and elements that you would normally see, just obviously shorter, so it's all possible. And my task was to write a pipeline for that. And I literally started to learn Python 1 year before this. Luckily, before that, I studied media computer science, so I was familiar with programming itself, but Python was relatively new. And at the same time, that was my very first pipeline at all. So the first thing I did was kind of like trying to understand how to write a pipeline. So what I did was I went online and I could not find any information how to write a pipeline. And luckily for me, at the Film Academy, where I studied technical directing, we had a bunch of projects that actually had pipeline TDs that used pipelines. And so I used inspiration from that and tried to create my own. And what happened actually, after I created the pipeline and we finished the project, we got the BFS award for this project. And my name was one of the people that basically was picked for that. Outstanding visual effects in a student project, awarded Breaking Point. So basically the Pipeline Plex became a VS awarded pipeline at the end of the day. My first pipeline that I ever wrote. And for me, it was really cool as an experience to write a pipeline, to simplify workflows, to make something like this. And that was really, really nice. And what I did there was basically twofold. One, I created workflows like this one. I created a structure to decide, okay, how do the different software work with each other? What kind of plugins do they use? What versions do they use? What file types do they use? And so on. And then obviously the other part, I created automation software. So everyone who joined any of my Python courses knows this. I wrote basically custom write nodes. I wrote custom export nodes, custom save applications, custom load application. Basically everything to simplify the process, to streamline the process, and to make the process easier. So the artist can focus mostly on making just good art, making cool explosions, and so on. So that is the main idea at the end of the day. I also gave a talk at the FMX 2017 about this pipeline, and I broke it down. I explained what's the thought process, how I built it, and so on and so forth. And then I decided also I wanted to release it for the public. So I spent another year of rewriting everything. As you're probably familiar, there's a big difference between having something local in your project and having something published for other people to use. There's a big discrepancies. Even if you create a model, you need to clean it up, make it more public accessible in a lot of ways versus just using it in your environment. So I spent a year to rewrite everything, try to create it, and that really became from the Pipeline Plex to the Open Source Pipeline Plex. And you can find it on github.com/alexanderrichter/plex even to this day. The Open Source Pipeline Plex started with the idea to break the status quo and give people working on film and games projects a great base, to provide a framework to build on and an advanced documentation so everyone is informed how to start and proceed in their own project. Since when I started to work on Breaking Point and I could not find information how to build a pipeline, that's basically what I needed. I needed some place where I can just either Google or find on Git, and I just can see, how do I start a pipeline? How do I build a pipeline? What's necessary? What's the structure? What steps do I need to take? And so that was the idea of the Open Source Pipeline Plex, is to create a base for that, for everyone who's interested to either create a pipeline or use a pipeline. So the core principles of the Open Source Pipeline Plex was basically access. So first thing I did was to put it in either the MIT license. This means you can use it for commercial and non-commercial projects. Be sure to credit me in the project and documentation, which means use it for whatever you want. You can download it and use it, change it, update it, whatever. You can just use it as a template. You can just follow the Wikipedia, whatever you want to do. The other part was about teaching. I wanted to explain the pipeline process because I felt it was so mystical. At the end of the day, it is a complex process, but it's not complicated. It's not rocket science, as you say. I created a wiki where I broke everything down and explained that. Then I wanted to create a template for my code. So I wanted people to see, how do I write a pipeline? What are the elements? What kind of coding structure do I write? What quality do I need? And so on. And last but not least, I wanted to give people a pipeline that they can download and use as a baseline for their project. So they can use that to start to create basically their own pipeline. That is how it basically looked like, more or less. So you have this kind of application, for example, and you can have it on desktop, and then you right click, and then you can select things like loader, and then you can load your shots, your assets, and so on. You can save them and so on, like all the basic stuff that you normally have. You can open Maya, and it knows certain paths. It has a menu, it has a shelf or whatever. So that's the main idea of what this was about. And at the same time, it is very flexible, so it doesn't care which operation system you use or which software you use. For example, this is the loader. The loader works in every DCC. You can use it in 3ds Max and Maya and Houdini and Nuke and Katana. It doesn't matter. The only difference that you maybe have to do, you maybe have to add this one line of how to open something in Katana, how to open something in Nuke. Everyone who joined like my beginner Python course knows exactly what I'm talking about. Everything is the same. It's just this one line that you need to change to trigger the API of the certain software, basically. And then over the past 4 years, Plex became more of a broken template than inspiration, because, we changed from Python 2 to Python 3, from PySet 2 to PySet 6. A lot of things changed, software updates, and so on. And even though it was still kind of a good template, it was not really a base anymore. So what I decided last year, I wanted to renew it for the future. And that's what I'm currently in the process of doing. If you are interested in the whole pipeline process act and how to structure a pipeline and so on, that is something where I would recommend you to watch our VFX pipeline TD Meetup. It was the third one. You can find it on YouTube or my blog. We go basically through the wiki, and we break down how a software pipeline looks like, naming conventions, and so on, like how to structure your folder and so on. So that is a really cool addition to Plex, basically, where we look at how to build a pipeline in terms of structure and everything. When I was looking in how to bring Plex to version 2.0, there's one thing that I learned over the last few years when working at different companies. I created at least 2 new pipelines in the meantime, and including I was working at WetaFX on Avatar the Wave Water. So I saw what they did with their pipeline, how they worked with that. What I found is the best way to approach this whole project, and I believe is maybe even the best way to approach every pipeline, is you should make a 90% pipeline. I think that is the thing that I want to do with Plex 2.0. I wanted Plex 2.0 be a 90% pipeline. So what do I mean with that? Let's look at the 100% pipeline. And one of the examples is basically ShotGrid, aka Shotgun, aka Autodesk Flow, depending on which year you are. That is a more or less 100% pipeline, especially how it's used and how it's structured. It tries to cover everything. It tries to be an everything pipeline for every situation, for every project, for every department, for everything. So let's look at a 100% pipeline. So what does a 100% pipeline is? A 100% pipeline usually tries to cover every operation system. It tries to have Linux, Mac, Windows, all of them at the same time, often even. So you can have some Linux stuff, you can have some Mac stuff, you can have some Windows stuff, and it's still working. The question that I throw up is like, who uses Mac and Visual Effects? Barely anyone uses Mac and Visual Effects professionally in a studio. The most common people who use Macs are producers, managers, and designers often. That is the most common people that actually use Mac. Most people who work in Maya, Houdini, Nuke, whatever, they mostly either use Linux in the bigger studios, and often in the smaller studios, you use Windows. Mac is not the most common thing. So, okay, that's maybe a percent that we can remove from 100%. Okay. Who uses Windows and Linux at the same time in the same project or the same studio? Happens from time to time. Maybe you have something you need to use, Photoshop or something that you don't have on the other one or whatever. But it doesn't happen that often. Usually, if you're Linux, everyone is on Linux. If you're on Windows, mostly everyone else is on Windows. So maybe 1% less about what we actually need. Then they want to cover every DCC. So often they include things like Photoshop, After Effects, and a lot of other stuff that are maybe not the most common one, especially for visual effects, animation, and games, that are there, that are used, but not particularly the core of what we use. They often include a lot of scripting languages. Often there is some kind of mix and match between different scripting languages. Sometimes you see some Mac script in between, or a little bit Mel here, or TCL, or HScript, or Vex, or whatever. And then you ask, is that necessary, or can we do everything basically in Python? And not only do you see different languages, you see often different principles. So when I looked at Shotgun, basically originally, I had always the feeling it felt like someone was writing shotgun in Python, but with a C++ mind. Which means it's a little bit like I'm speaking English, but I have suddenly an accent, and I'm speaking like this all the time. And you're like, oh, this is English, but they sound Soviet. And then you're like, oh, okay, it is English, but it has an accent. And same thing. It's like if someone is writing Python code, but they learned C++. That means they write Python. It's correct. It works. But all the structure, all the thought process, it seems like off. It seems like they're using a different grammar that's acceptable, but strange. And that's something that you can feel a lot of times. They want to include every department, even small ones. And every manual task has to be automated and integrated, basically. They try to cover everything. They throw a net and try to include everything that they can put in there. And that creates a lot of these extra things. What I say is manual tasks aren't the enemy. It's the waste of time due to repetitive tasks, organization, complexity, mistakes, and so on. It's not about we need to automate everything or integrate everything. We need to figure out what is wasting us time. Because just because we do something manual, it doesn't mean it wastes time. Because writing code can takes longer than doing something manually. It depends on the cost efficiency of everything. Same thing with AI. When we talked about Copilot, we talked about cost efficiency. It's not about using AI or not using AI. It's about, can I use AI and be faster than not using AI and better, basically. It's not about if AI is good or bad. It's about, is it more cost efficient to use it versus not to use it? Because if it's better to use it sometimes, then you should use it sometimes, but not all the time. Same thing here. It's good to automate and integrate sometimes, but not if it's not good, because you can do it manually faster and better and more cost efficient. So let's look at the example that I want to bring with Plex. So Plex is a 90% pipeline. What does that mean? Looking at what we just said. So one of the core principles that I wanted to bring, that I started originally, but that I really push hard on this one after looking at all the pipelines from Weta, Framestore, and all the other that I worked and saw, basically, is I try to create a minimalistic structure. What does that mean? We just mentioned the operation system. How about we only allow one operation system at a time? Yes, we can use Windows. Yes, we can use Linux. And actually, we can use Mac. But we cannot use them at the same time. And what does it make a difference? It makes a big difference, because if you look at Flow, the Autodesk Flow shot grid, you will see there is functions just dedicated to translate paths from Mac to Windows to Linux. Because obviously on one is a server, on the other one is C, on the other one it's something else. So they need to always translate to this network path, to this network path, and to this network path, which can be different. Maybe forward backward slashes can be a problem, as we also learn sometimes, and so on and so forth. So by focusing on only one, we don't have that. We also don't have this multiplication of having 3 paths. We have a Windows path, a Linux path, and a Mac path. And there actually exists even in Flow, these absolute paths like this. Okay, so we don't know. We focus on one, and we focus on not having parallel operation system. So we don't cover Linux and Windows at the same time. We can do Linux and we can do Windows, but we don't do both at the same time. And that removes a lot of these elements and code and things that we have. The other one is we focus on visual effects software, mainly on Maya, 3ds Max, Houdini, Nuke, everything that's usually used, the main core of visual effects animation and games, not the typical, things like Photoshop. Photoshop can be important depending where you are, especially in texture and so on, but it's definitely not a core element of a lot of these pipelines. So instead of supporting it completely and integrating completely, how about we create a workflow? A nice PDF where we explain how to export your stuff from Photoshop somewhere else. We explain that to the artist and move on, instead of wasting like weeks to create JavaScript applications and plugins for Photoshop and whatnot. And then what we basically do, and that's the most important, we create quality checker. And we don't restrict during the process, we restrict at the end of the process. So we don't care how the artist is working. They can work a little bit more messy. They can break the names. They don't have maybe names. They call everyone X, Y, Z. We don't care. The important part is when they finished and they want to push their project to the next department. Let's say a modeler finished their project and they want to give their model to the rigging. Now we say, okay, we expect you to have certain names. We expect you to have certain hierarchy. We expect you to have certain locations. We have to expect you certain vertex count and so on, because that's what the rigging department wants from you. Our goal is not to constantly, minimize the effort. And every one of you experience that when you have pipelines that are so tight that you cannot do anything. You literally are like, okay, I want to save somewhere else, but I can't because the pipeline doesn't allow me to even save somewhere else. As like, who cares about where you save? It's only important where you export. We don't waste time to create tools that are not necessary for what it actually is about. It's to connect different departments with each other. And last but not least is by keeping things simple and removing all this noise, we keep it accessible so it's easy to add new elements, like adding a new script and fixing things. Oh, something is not working. There is not much complexity in this thing. I can easily find where this is. And finally, we want to make sure that this is a Python pipeline, which means it's Pythonic, it's written in a Python logic, and it's built in a Python structure versus it is, kind of a C++ idea and so on. We avoid non-Python software, for example, Photoshop, After Effects, which are like JavaScript, for example, and we integrate it, but we maybe will not write particularly script for that, more like workflows. And we avoid other scripting language as far as possible. If we have the opportunity to write some Mac script, let's write Python script instead, or Mel script, let's write Python script. Maybe there's a situation, and it can happen, that you need Mac script here or Vex for sure. But usually you can always make sure that all the scripts in the pipeline are just Python scripts. There is no other languages involved, which is not absolutely necessity. And let's look how this looks actually in action. Measuring success by being a 90% pipeline. So for example, when I originally introduced Plex, it has a hierarchy mode. So what can it do? Basically, what you can do is you can write a script, like let's say you write an exporter and you put it in your studio environment. Then we change this exporter to be different in a project. Then we change this exporter to be different in the department, and we make a custom version for the user, because maybe FX has different export elements and so on and so forth. So you can basically layer the same script with different changes, and depending on your project or department or person, you can have a different result. Cool. But this is a 10% thing. This, in reality, doesn't happen that often. So it's about, okay, we have this cool hierarchy tool, and it's written well. It's not super complicated, but it's still extra that is barely used in a typical process. So it's about, okay, so let's not have that. And since we have a 90% pipeline, let's remove that. And by removing this, yes, we removed a feature that we have, but we removed a feature that is not the most important thing, that is not the core of the things. And we removed a lot of extra complexity and code and so on. The other one that I measure success and being a 90% pipeline is less code. So I follow this quote by Mark Twain is, I didn't have time to write a short letter, so I wrote a long one instead. And if you ever coded something, that is actually true. So basically, if you just write something fast, often the code is long. If you spend more time with the code, you spend time optimizing, making a second draft, making a third draft, and you reduce the code. And that's a very important measurement for good quality code, is how many iterations did you do? And if you did write anything, every one of us has written something, we always know the first draft is the worst draft. So we always have to spend the second time. And we also know usually the second draft and the third draft is shorter. So let's look at Plex. So originally, when I looked at it a few months ago, like a year ago, it had 8,482 lines of code. It's not too much, to be honest. I always like to keep my scripts very tidy. I don't like to overcode at all, but it was still more. So what I said, when I did all the updates that I just mentioned, including optimizing things, it suddenly became 6,630 lines of code. So I removed 22% of code with similar results. And with the credo, if it's not important, delete it. And the idea is always less code means less stuff to look at, less complexity, and easier to get in, understand, and add to that thing. Another way of measuring success is how much you use templates and reuse elements, for example. One of the elements we have in Plex is UI element that can be reused. In this case, it's called IRUtil. This is this one on the left one. So what IRUtil is, basically, it's a template for a UI plus a few functions, and every other UI is built on that. So you can see IRLoad is basically IRUtil just with an extra window for loading shots and assets. IRSave is basically IRUtil with just a saving element, and IRSaveAs basically the same with also creating folders and so on. And if we look at the results, so this is IRUtil, this is IRLoad. It uses the same script as an element, and then it adds something to it. It's two different elements of code, but they come together to build this whole script. So that means I don't have to write this whole thing 3 times. If I have 3 applications, I write it once and reuse it 3 times. And what happens at the end, I save a lot of code. So here you can see this is the whole circle is the full code of IRLoad. 45% of IRLoad is IRUtil code. Basically, all the things that I normally would retype again, I can reuse. So basically, by integrating a template, a reusable element, I can basically save, for example, in this case, and in other cases, very similar numbers, I can save 45 to 50% of code because I reuse elements again and again and again. And they're easy to modify because if I update the UI in IRUtil, all my applications will have a different color, different structure, different everything, which is really, really cool. The other thing is optimizing accessibility. And again, we talked about IRUtil as a template. And for example, on the left side, you see the original design. On the right side, you see the modern design. And the thing is, I wanted to simplify everything. Less colors, less complexity. And you can see here, on the left side, there's a lot of information you have. On the right side, a lot of this information is compressed into categories much more. And at the same time, it doesn't, overwhelm you with colors and information and so on. And that makes a big, big difference at the end of the day. So by using better design, it's also more accessible for the artists that will later use it. And that is the main idea here. It's basically to create a better pipeline, not only for you as a learning environment, as something that you can understand how pipelines work, but also in 2025 to re-update it to a Plex 2.0 and make it a 90% pipeline that you can download. You can put either in your own laptop, or you can bring into your studio and say, hey, let's use this as a base for our next project, basically, and let's add our own scripts to make it more flexible. So what are the basic applications for a 90% pipeline? Basic applications are non-DCC, which means they are not digital content creation. So basically not specifically for Maya, not specifically for Houdini. They're independent, and they're not task specific. What application does every project need? Like UI template, obviously, loading, saving, like a desktop application, that's always nice, publishing, importing, changing the settings of, where's the path to Maya, where's the element here, where's the project, and so on, and quality check. Making sure that especially when you publish, that everything is correct and as it should be. And that's the things that I'm currently working on. The first few are already there, so it needs some tweaking. And the last one are, because again, our goal is to create a 90% pipeline that does the heavy lifting, but avoids the extreme complexity that are absolutely not necessary. So looking at the roadmap for Plex in 2025, what is the goal that I want to make in this year and that you can follow and hopefully also you can use in the near future is basically, first one, I want to add and upgrade the basic application, the one that I just mentioned. I want to upgrade the code in itself because also there's things I personally learned working at Weta and all the other companies, and also want to update the wiki so I can also upgrade how to build a pipeline, how to build naming conventions, folder structure, and so on. And I want to make it a basic pipeline that you can download tomorrow and that you can use in your projects, and that really gives you a baseline of, okay, I want to do a project tomorrow. We have 5 people. Let's download Plex and let's start and then add our own custom scripts outside of the loaders and savers and publishers that already are in there. And another part to make this even stronger, I would like to include a community. So I'm also always happy to use it in projects. If someone of you wants to contribute to the project, you're welcome to join me on github.com/alexanderrichter.td/Plex. You can write error reports in the future. You can give suggestions and so on. And One of the things that I'm currently also working on is working with sponsors, which means I'm working with studios where we integrate Plex into the studio. They hire me to help them as a pipeline TD, but at the same time, every change that we do in the studio for Plex, that will come back to the open source pipeline. And that benefits everyone. The studio benefits from all the updates that are made outside of the studio, and the open source pipeline benefits from any updates that are made inside any studio, basically. So we're keeping this open source pipeline Plex open and going in both directions. It helps the studio because it gets features they don't pay for, but it helps the community because features that are paid from a studio are suddenly included into the open source environment. Then one of the things that and how they basically started my latest course is I also want to integrate more GitHub Copilot AI use, because I found it's relatively helpful, and it also is kind of the situation where you can really challenge AI coding at the moment by using something like Pipeline Plex, because it's more complex than writing one application, because it has to understand a lot of elements. And so it's interesting also to learn about that, and also help me with AI to write better code, to optimize things, and so on. That's something that I'm working on this year, is to use, for example, something like Git Copilot to help me optimize things, because it's like working with an assistant who gives you suggestions here and there, and so on. If you're interested, by the way, to this topic, check out our latest TD meetup, GitHub Copilot. It's also, you can find it on my blog at alexanderrichtertd.com/blog, or my YouTube channel, obviously. And we look into how AI can help you with coding, which, again, especially if you work with something like Plex, can really be helpful if you have someone to kind of guide you a little bit, explain you something, and so on. So I'm not just saying it's a nice tool, but especially linked with something like a complexity of a pipeline, it's nice to have someone helping you. It's not a silver bullet. It will not fix all your problems. It sometimes doesn't know what to do itself, but it is definitely helpful to have it. And that's one of the reasons that I'm currently using it as well, because I see some of the benefits coming with it. If you're interested also to learn more, I just released a Python Copilot course, which basically means how to write Python code using GitHub Copilot, and help you basically with the assistance of that. You can find it on my website, and it's currently on a big discount. And if you're interested in learning about that, just check out alexanderrichtertd.com/Python Copilot. Another thing that could be interesting for a lot of you, especially if you're interested in Plex and so on, I'm currently also working on a Python pipeline course, which means how to build a Python pipeline from scratch. And one of the key elements that I will use in this course will be Plex. I will use Plex as a template to break down how to build a pipeline. We also will look at different pipeline elements. We will look at maybe flow, maybe a few other like paid and open source pipeline. There's not many, but there's a few that I have in my mind. So we can also compare how does they do it? What do they do? And what is better, what is worse? But the idea is basically of this course is learning how to write a visual effects, animation, and games pipeline from scratch, and using Plex as an example for that, basically. So yeah, if you're interested, check it out. You can also find it on my website, alexanderrichtertd.com/Python-pipeline. I'm currently aiming at around summer coming out. It depends a little bit how things are going. I always have to prioritize a little bit which one is the most important project at the moment. So just to summarize, so basically, Plex is currently on a state where I'm currently still in development. I'm just at a few things. I'm currently refactoring, rewriting, and so on. So it's currently not usable. Yeah, just to be clear. You can download it. I can show you. I can actually show you how it looks now. So you know what I mean when I say it is working. So for example, we are currently in Plex. We go into executable. We go into Windows. And let's open the desktop app. I open it with the console so we can see. It checks your Python version, and then we have here this Plex icon. Here you can see Plex, right-click. We right-click, and then we have a few options. We can open different software, which means we open the software with certain startups. Everyone who's just joined my Python courses know about startups and user setups and menus and inits and so on. So we open them, and they will have menus and elements like that. And we have obviously things like help and report. And we have this one of the most important tools, how to load anything. So let's click on that one. And then basically we get the loader that I just showed, and we can basically open different elements, work, publish, and so on. And let's, for example, open this one. And then you can see it does a certain things. It opens Maya, it gives Maya certain information, it creates a menu, it adds certain paths. You can see we have even our custom splash screen and so on. This is already working. But there's a lot of kind of small things that I broke in the last few months because I wanted to rewrite the whole code. And it's normal if you try to rewrite on that level, a lot of things will be breaking. And so you can see, like, we opened current asset here. We actually have a menu even in Maya now. It's a little bit small. The resolution is quite high at the moment. But at the top, we also have a Plex menu, and we can also have a Plex shelf. We can do the same thing for Nuke, Houdini. It doesn't matter, 3ds Max, it's all the same to us because Plex is built on an abstract system that is driven by configuration files. So a lot of the things that we will do is just change configuration files to change the content. So we can do here, we have the same things. We can load, we can save, we can do different things. Let's see here, one is not working. So yeah, that is the main idea. So this is how far we are at the moment. So it's not completely not working. It's working, but there's a lot of pieces that are not put together at the moment. So that's the goal. So at the moment, it's literally kind of in an alpha stage of the 2.0 version. So it will take a few months before it will be ready on, like, it works and there's new features that just coming. So just be aware that at the moment it's not 100% working. But the idea is in the next few months, I will polish it so you can download it and you can start it. You can just change your path to your project and it will know where it is. You can open your Maya. It knows where your project is. You can open your custom menu. You can include your own scripts and so on and so forth. So that's the idea that you have. And at the same time, if you go to the website, let's dive a little bit into that one as well, so you can see what it is. So we are at github.com/alexanderrichtertd. So for example, you can see here you can find the code. You can either clone it or download it if you're not familiar with Git. And you can see this will be all updated. And besides that, there's a wiki that even to now is already interesting, especially here, the structure elements are super important because here we talk about how to structure your project, for example, and we talk about naming conventions of the project, what kind of folder do you need? We talk about software pipelines here, for example, how do you build your pipeline as we saw, how do you visualize it? What kind of information do you need? And so on and so forth. We have things like naming convention and so on. All of that we talked about in our Visual Effects Pipeline TD Meetup, number 3. So check it out if you're interested in this kind of details, but it is all in the wiki because the idea of Plex is not only to have a downloadable base pipeline, it's also to inform you how to do things. And also it informs you, obviously, if you're interested how to build a pipeline, this is here. I mean, it's not 100% working now. It works, but it's not finished. But you can access it. You can know, okay, how do I execute the pipeline? Okay, let's go to Exe, Windows, and the desktop thing that I just executed. This is the one. Oh, okay. Okay, I call the script Plex start. Okay, let's go to Plex start. So we go to scripts and code Plex start. Okay, and this is the script that starts the whole thing. And you can see here we have a bunch of dictionaries that give all the paths. And at the end, we have basically this part where it starts either our desktop, the one that we saw here at the bottom, or it starts a certain software, Maya, Houdini, Nuke, and so on. So you literally can use that for your own pipeline. Obviously, this is advanced. This is not beginner-friendly. I spend a lot of time to make it as accessible as possible. So a lot of these things are also tried to be clean and easy to read, but still complex enough so I don't have to copy-paste the code again and again and again. So it's this kind of fine line between accessible and still advanced. That's the thing that I want to go through basically at the end of the day. That's it from my side. Any questions or comments or anything you want to talk about regarding pipeline or pipeline Plex or something? You can also share your experience with pipelines. How did you come up with the name Plex? Is there a story behind it? Not really a story, actually. So Plex is very simply, it's Pipeline Alex. Plex. That's the idea, until I found out that actually there is a streaming platform that is called Plex that I don't know, because it's not familiar in Germany, and I don't know. I think there's a few places that actually is familiar, but most places I feel like Plex is not really familiar. But yeah, it's basically pipeline, so nothing crazy.
So I just want to understand how you're going to take it forward, like whether you're going to still keep it open source for a long time, or though you even work with your vendors to support you for the funding. So how do you foresee in the long time? Because if we are going to get this on board and try to set up things or maybe develop things on the way, probably how do you see the future thing?
Plex will always be open source. I'm not planning to do any like I'm not doing the open AI thing where I make something open and then make it not open and still call myself OpenAI and will be bought by Microsoft. So no. So the idea of Plex, it will always be the base pipeline Plex will always be accessible like it is, especially with all the information and the code. The two things that I'm thinking of where maybe a part of business comes possibility is if you want to hire me as a developer, sure, then that will be on. The other part is maybe certain plugins, certain scripts that are specifically extra that could be individually, but the Plex pipeline in itself will be open always. This will not change. I want to have an open source pipeline that is accessible and that covers all the base thing. The only thing that could be realistic is a little bit, since for me it's more important to make this a template versus I'm not. There is no big plan at the moment to support this until forever. So I'm not like focusing on that. The more important part for me is to make this as a good base. And if you have a developer who is decent, they will be able to use this to keep it running and to add new things to that, even in your own studio or something. So that is the main idea at the moment, to create a platform that you can start with when you create a project or your studio or something like that. That is where this is going for now. I guess all the DCCs connect with the central data via plugins. How difficult is to develop specific plugins like for Blender or Gaffer? You probably mean just like simple scripts. I mean, if you can write your scripts, the big important part that you will do when you are, I can show you. Let's say you write a new script, and so there's like a few things you need to do basically. So one of the things when you write a new script is obviously you need to, like, one of the things that are recommended if you write an application that has a user interface, and that's something that I will explain obviously in the wiki. So this is just something that I pre-explain now. So obviously, for example, we just looked at the loader, yeah. So the important part, for example, if you write an application that has a UI, is that you import the IR util, which was the template that we had before, the blue one, and that you integrate that into your workflow, which means you use it as a parent and you use it here in the environment, basically. Where is it? Here. Like show it, for example, and integrate the elements. That's it. Like you need like a few code elements that you need to include in that, and it will be part of the big kind of environment. And the other part that you need to do is you need to integrate it into the software, which means you probably need to attack a configuration file, which is probably this one. And the only thing you need to do, for example, let's say you want to change which Maya version it is. You change this number here, and suddenly it's a different Maya version. I actually will make a UI for this. Currently, even I have actually a UI for this. And the other part is, for example, let's say you want to include your Vidal's custom script here. The only thing you need to do is basically you need to update this lines of code here. So you add a new line here. Okay, let's say Vidal's tool or something like that, and then vtool, let's call this, and that's the name, and that's the import, and that's it. If I would restart Maya, it will have this new element in the menu, and then if I press it, it will execute import vtool.start, and then it will execute your script. And then inside your script, you need to import our tool, IUtil, and you need to maybe use some of the functions that the whole script has, like how to get the information of the project or whatever. That's the only thing. That's the core elements that you need, basically. Integrate Plex functions and integrate your tool into the Plex workflow. And that's basically it. And the same thing, if you want to integrate a new software like Blender, you need to update certain elements. Like, for example, you need to create this configuration file for Blender, and you need to add a new Python file to execute Blender. That's it. It's a little bit more work if you add a new software like Blender or Katana or something. But to add a new script like this, it's relatively easy. You can literally just throw your script into here. You throw your script here and like V tools, add this line of code, and it should be working.
Thank you.
So yeah, but I'm also working on again, there will be a video and documentation to explain the process of how to integrate things, how to start it, obviously. But at the moment, I'm not touching this because I rewrite so much of the code, because if I would do a tutorial today, it will be outdated tomorrow, basically. So I'm still waiting until I get it to a finished state before I do that. So yeah, that is the main idea here, is that we create a pipeline that is basically accessible to everyone and has this kind of thing. But again, it is not easy. This is not something like, if you don't have any Python knowledge, or if you really just write your mini scripts, this will be still, there is some learning curve. But at the end of the day, the idea is you can download it and it works in general out of the box. And then you can add your small scripts or elements, and like your artist will find them in the menus or in the shelves without you having to, really change much. Besides, as I mentioned, change the configuration file, throw your file into apps, and then it's working. The idea is still kind of, to bring something to you and to everyone who's interested that is about, just making cool stuff, and having a tool that doesn't hinder you, that doesn't stand in your way, but that is basically supporting you, and while still not being so complex that you spend forever to just figure things out and stuff like that. So for me, simplicity is key, because I saw pipelines that basically did everything, but were just nightmare to fix or to add. And I remember I spent on Shotgun. Originally, I spent a whole day to fix one line of code, because I could not find the line of, I could not even find the line of code. I didn't know where it is. It just literally, there was an error. I know the error. I know what it was. I didn't know where the code was, because it was so complex and convoluted build that it was just it took me like, sometimes it took me a week to do something that I could, like, if I know what I was doing, I could do in 10 minutes, but it took me a week to figure it out, because I needed to find the right element. I needed to know the connections and so on. That's something that I try to avoid, because it's too easy to build a system that is so much a house of cards that you pay the price over time. So that, for me, that's the main idea. It's the same thing as I do my masterclasses. It's not that I inventing something. It's that I make it better than anyone else when it comes to delivering. As much as I focus on quality, I focus on less is more. Same thing, I focus on my masterclasses. I don't do masterclasses that are 50 hours. I do masterclasses that are 8 hours, because I remove 42 hours that you don't need or don't care about. That is the focus of everything. And the same thing I go with Plex. It's not about how much I put in. It's about how much I take away that is not necessary, which again is the 10%, that if you think about projects, the last 10%, it takes the longest time, and not always are they worthy of your time, depending on what you do, And on a pipeline scale, that's not what you focus on. Your goal is to make great games, great visual effects, and great series and films. The pipeline is not the 100% thing that you really need. It's something that supports you, and that's the idea of the Open Source Pipeline Plex. So yeah, so if you're interested, check it out on Git. I will definitely do announcements when it is released for a more complete package. Again, it's working now, but I would say it needs some polishing to be a real complete package. So I will announce that when it comes out. Will be in the next few months, when I have a rep version, like a beta version 2.0 that you can use and download. And obviously, if you use Git, you can always pull the updates. If I announce an update, you can just update it like a video game update. You can just pull it, and then it will be integrated into you don't need to copy files or something directly by yourself. If you're interested in future TD meetups, feel free to sign up for our newsletter, alexanderrichtertd.com/newsletter. We also talk about different things. We talk about masterclasses and TD topics, but we also announce future TD meetups One of the next TD meetups will be Grok and DeepSeek. Thank you, everyone. It was a pleasure to have you. This was definitely a little bit more of a different environment, but I'm always happy to share a few things that I believe are important for you. So hopefully you have the opportunity to. I can highly recommend you to check it out. You can find it on GitHub. I also posted the link in here. Even already now, you can use it as a template. You can use it to understand how pipelines work. Also watch the TD Meetup VFX pipelines. That will explain a lot about this. But even on a scale of how to build a pipeline, everything is in there. The only thing that I'm working on is to polish this, to get it to a complete round package, and then to deliver it in the next few months, so you can download it, use it in your next project as a freelancer, as a studio, and then add new scripts to that, so you have something that you can work with as a base. Because one of the things that I noticed actually when I was talking with a lot of people is most environments, a lot of projects, especially on a smaller scale, they don't have anything, nothing. Everyone's just still typing names and saving manually and doing things like that. And maybe they have a few scripts here and a few scripts there, but they're all disjointed and everyone's doing their own thing and stuff like that. And that is the thing that this wants to solve is it starts with you have nothing, use this. This will give you a base, and you can now add scripts to that are integrated directly into that by changing 1-2 lines and putting the file into a certain folder, and now it's already part of the whole project. That is the idea, is to make it simple and accessible. That is my focus, and I don't think any other pipeline is focusing on that. Most pipelines are focusing in making this behemoth thing, basically like flow replacements, to make this big thing that can do everything and is flexible. And I don't care about that. My thing is make a lightweight pipeline that can jump into every project and is easy to understand, easy to use, and just pushes your project to the next level at the end of the day.
I welcome you to join us live and also watch the previous episodes, and I'll see you on our next TD Meetup.